In quiet neighborhoods, behind locked doors, a sinister crime is spreading, one that often goes unnoticed until it is far too late. This is the shocking story of Cuckooing, a dark underworld where criminals infiltrate the homes of vulnerable people, taking control of their lives, their possessions, and sometimes their very safety. But one case exposed the terrifying extremes of this hidden world. A murder so brutal and calculated that it shocked authorities and left the community questioning how safe anyone truly is behind closed doors. Tonight, we uncover the chilling events, the unsuspecting victims, and the twisted minds behind a crime that most people would never imagine happening in their own streets. A nightmare behind closed doors. The streets of London hold secrets few dare to imagine. To the casual observer, the city is alive with lights, laughter, and the bustle of daily life. Yet, hidden behind the brick walls of ordinary homes is a dark, insidious practice that preyed upon society's most vulnerable. This practice is known as cuckooing, a form of exploitation in which drug dealers take over the homes of addicts, using them as safe havens for their operations. It is a crime that often goes unnoticed, its victims silenced by fear and addiction, until tragedy strikes in a way no one can ignore. The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where neighbors noticed something strange. Doors that were normally locked were now left open. Visitors came at all hours, some leaving with sacks, others vanishing into the shadows. For the unsuspecting residents, life continued, oblivious to the silent threat growing in their midst. But for the Harris family, it was different. The Harris family was known in the community as ordinary, hardworking people. The father, a retired mechanic, spent his days tending to the garden, while his wife kept a small shop in the local market. Their teenage son, a bright student, had ambitions of becoming an engineer. It seemed like any other family, shielded from the chaos of the outside world. Yet, their lives were about to collide with a criminal underworld that would tear their family apart. It started with small signs. A neighbor noticed strangers loitering near their house, and packages began appearing mysteriously at their door. Their once peaceful home was slowly being infiltrated. The family received warnings, subtle at first, from people who knew the dangers of confronting the intruders. They were told to stay quiet, to avoid drawing attention. Fear began to seep into every corner of their lives, yet the full extent of the danger remained unseen. Cuckooing is not just a method of criminal convenience. It is psychological warfare. The victim, often struggling with addiction or vulnerability, is manipulated into compliance. The criminal presence invades their home, asserting dominance and slowly stripping away autonomy. In many cases, the victims are too terrified to speak out, and when they do, authorities face an uphill battle to untangle the web of threats, debts, and intimidation. In the Harris family case, the stakes escalated beyond intimidation. One evening, the family returned home from their routine activities to find the house in chaos. Drawers had been rifled through, cupboards left open, and valuables missing. There was a message scrawled on the wall in crude handwriting, a warning that was both ominous and chilling. It became clear that the Harris family was no longer just a witness to this world. They had become targets. The dark world of cuckooing is built on silence and control, but the Harris family's resilience was about to be tested in unimaginable ways. The community watched from a distance, unsure whether to intervene, while authorities began piecing together a narrative that would shock even seasoned detectives. It was a world where fear is currency, trust is a luxury, and survival depends on walking a fine line between confrontation and submission. This case would reveal not just the brutal consequences of allowing criminals to operate unchecked, but also the intricate network that enables such crimes to flourish. The events that unfolded would expose the vulnerability of families, the cunning of predators, and the societal blind spots that allow a nightmare like cuckooing to thrive. And then, one night, everything changed. A single act, intended to intimidate, spiraled into an event so horrific that it captured national attention, leaving detectives and the public stunned. The Harris family was about to discover that the darkness they had been living beside was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The threat escalates from intimidation to terror. After the first signs of intrusion, the Harris family tried to maintain normalcy, convincing themselves that it was a temporary problem. But in the world of cuckooing, temporary is rarely enough. The strangers who had taken interest in their home were not looking for a casual arrangement. They were asserting control, marking the family as easy prey, and sending a message that any resistance would be met with consequences far worse than fear. It started subtly. Items would disappear, small sums of money vanished from drawers, and the family began receiving late-night visitors who claimed vague debts, owed by someone the family barely knew. These encounters seemed like random intimidation tactics, but as weeks passed, the pattern became undeniable. The Harris home was being transformed into a hub for criminal activity. Drug addicts were lured there, dealers came to oversee transactions, and the family was forced to witness the illegal trade unfold within their living space. The father tried to reason with the intruders. He offered money, he begged them to leave, and he even attempted to negotiate a truce. None of it worked. Each interaction was met with mockery or thinly veiled threats, and with each passing day, the sense of safety eroded further. The mother began to fear for the safety of her teenage son, who had once roamed the neighborhood freely, but now barely left the house. The boy, bright and ambitious, grew withdrawn, haunted by the shadows that crept into his home. What makes cuckooing particularly insidious is the psychological manipulation involved. Victims are not merely robbed or intimidated, they are trapped in a constant state of anxiety and submission. The criminals exploit vulnerabilities, whether addiction, financial desperation, or social isolation. In the Harris family case, the intruders exploited a combination of fear, respect for violence, and the psychological pressure of isolation. Every warning, every confrontation, was designed to make the family feel powerless, forcing them to accept the criminal presence as part of their reality. Neighbors began noticing the changes as well. The laughter and life that once defined the Harris household disappeared. Windows remained shuttered, lights dimmed early, and the once bustling front garden was abandoned. Some neighbors whispered about strange noises at night, people entering and leaving at odd hours, and even fleeting glimpses of someone dragging heavy sacks across the living room. Yet, the fear of retaliation kept witnesses silent. In the eyes of the criminals, the world outside the house was a separate reality, one that could be ignored or controlled. Authorities finally became aware of the severity of the situation after a harrowing phone call. The mother, her voice trembling, reported an intruder holding a weapon in the living room, demanding access to a hidden stash. Police officers were dispatched, but when they arrived, the intruder had vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of chaos and fear. It was the first concrete evidence that the Harris family was no longer just a victim of minor theft or intimidation. They were living under the control of a dangerous criminal network. The detectives assigned to the case were seasoned, yet they found themselves navigating a complicated web. Unlike conventional burglaries or home invasions, cuckooing involves a combination of psychological warfare, illegal trade, and strategic intimidation. The criminals rarely commit acts in public view, making evidence scarce. Witnesses already fearful are reluctant to testify. Each lead required meticulous investigation. Each step forward met with resistance from a family terrified for their lives. The turning point came when the teenage son attempted to intervene, confronting one of the intruders over a stolen item. The confrontation escalated quickly, resulting in physical violence that left the boy bruised and shaken. It was a stark reminder that in the world of cuckooing, even the smallest act of resistance can trigger disproportionate retaliation. The Harris family realized that ordinary measures, locks, warnings, and polite requests were insufficient against individuals who operated without conscience or concern for human life. From subtle intimidation to open aggression, the Harris family was witnessing a horrifying evolution of threat. What began as minor disturbances had escalated into full-blown terror, a living nightmare that no ordinary family should endure. The stage was set for the events that would ultimately lead to tragedy, revealing the true dangers lurking behind the closed doors of a seemingly quiet home. The murder that shattered normalcy. The tension inside the Harris household reached a breaking point one stormy evening when the unthinkable occurred. What had started as harassment and psychological manipulation escalated into violence, crossing a line that could never be ignored. The family had grown accustomed to fear, yet nothing could have prepared them for the horrific act that was about to unfold. On that fateful night, the father had gone to check on the house after noticing shadows flickering past the windows. The mother stayed behind with the teenage son, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. Then, the door burst open with a force that no ordinary home invasion could create. Several masked individuals stormed in, their movements deliberate, their eyes cold. These were no longer intruders seeking to intimidate. They were predators with a single purpose: control through violence. The intruders confronted the family directly, demanding access to hidden funds and controlled substances that, In reality, the Harris family barely possessed. Their threats were clear and merciless, and when the father attempted to intervene, he was struck down. The teenage son tried to shield his mother, but he too was overpowered. The sheer brutality of the act left the family reeling, unable to comprehend that their home, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield. The mother's cries for help brought neighbors to the windows, but fear kept them from intervening directly. In those moments, the horror of cuckooing became undeniable. This was not a crime of opportunity or random violence. It was a calculated act designed to assert dominance and terrorize. Every movement of the intruders was choreographed to instill fear and break the spirit of the family. They left no room for negotiation, no possibility of mercy. When the police arrived, the scene was grisly and chaotic. The house bore signs of struggle: furniture overturned, doors splintered, and walls marked with scratches from desperate attempts to defend oneself. Most disturbingly, the father had been murdered, a brutal act that stunned investigators and shattered the illusion that the Harris family could survive this nightmare. The teenage son and mother were shaken but physically alive, their trauma etched into every expression. Detectives immediately recognized that this was a case that went beyond domestic violence or burglary. The murder revealed the lethal potential of cuckooing when unchecked. This practice, often dismissed as a nuisance affecting addicts or vulnerable individuals, had escalated into a violent crime that claimed a life. The murder scene offered chilling evidence of the intruder's methodology: intimidation through presence, coercion, and ultimately lethal force. Forensic experts worked meticulously, documenting every detail. Fingerprints, footprints, and traces of DNA were carefully catalogued, yet the challenge remained in identifying the perpetrators. Cuckooing networks are highly organized, with operatives trained to minimize exposure and evade law enforcement. Witnesses were traumatized, making testimonies inconsistent, and the perpetrators' knowledge of the community's blind spots gave them a dangerous advantage. The psychological impact on the survivors was immediate and profound. The mother and son were placed under protective custody, but the emotional scars ran deep. They had witnessed the murder of a loved one, faced their attackers directly, and endured months of fear that culminated in the ultimate act of violence. The investigators, too, faced the challenge of navigating a crime that was both brutal and meticulously concealed, understanding that every lead could potentially expose the family to further danger. This murder marked a turning point, not only in the Harris family story, but in public awareness of cuckooing itself. The case forced authorities to acknowledge the deadly reality of a practice that had been largely hidden from public scrutiny. It highlighted the need for proactive intervention, support for vulnerable communities, and understanding that such crimes are rarely isolated incidents. They are part of a wider criminal ecosystem. The Harris family's life had been irrevocably altered. Their home, once a place of warmth and normalcy, had become a symbol of fear and loss. The murder left an indelible mark on the community, forcing neighbors to confront a reality they had long avoided. And for detectives, it presented a stark warning: in the world of cuckooing, violence is never far behind, and the line between intimidation and murder can be devastatingly thin. Unraveling the network, the investigation begins. The murder of the Harris family patriarch sent shockwaves through the local community and put authorities on high alert. Detectives knew from the start that this was not an isolated act of violence. It was a symptom of a far larger problem. Cuckooing, until now largely ignored as a peripheral crime, had revealed its deadly potential. The investigation was not only about identifying the perpetrators, but understanding the hidden ecosystem that allowed such crimes to flourish. The first step was meticulously combing through the crime scene. Every detail mattered: fingerprints on doorknobs, scuff marks on floors, even the trajectory of broken furniture. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to reconstruct the events leading to the murder. Early analysis suggested that the intruders were highly organized, entering and exiting with precision, aware of police protocols, and leaving behind minimal trace evidence. This was not the work of amateurs. These were criminals who had studied the vulnerabilities of their victims and the blind spots of law enforcement. Interviews with the surviving family members provided critical insights. The mother, still traumatized, described the routine of the intruders, who visited the house, at what times, and how they exerted control over the household. The teenage son recalled names, faces, and even fragments of conversations that hinted at connections to a wider network. Investigators began mapping the web of influence, understanding that the Harris home was only one node in a sprawling criminal operation, preying on vulnerable individuals across the city. Detectives turned to community intelligence, speaking with neighbors and local business owners. Many admitted to noticing suspicious activity, but had been too fearful to report it. This pattern of silent complicity was exactly what made cuckooing so effective. Criminals operated in plain sight, relying on intimidation to suppress witnesses, and the investigation quickly revealed multiple households experiencing similar intrusions. It became clear that the perpetrators were not acting alone. They were part of a coordinated network using fear and addiction as tools for exploitation. The investigation also uncovered the financial mechanisms behind cuckooing. The intruders were using occupied homes to store and distribute drugs, laundering money through petty transactions, and manipulating victims into compliance with promises of protection or repayment of fictitious debts. This economic exploitation intertwined with psychological control, creating a cycle that was difficult for authorities to disrupt. The Harris case provided a rare window into these operations, revealing both the human cost and the calculated strategy employed by criminals. Police surveillance and intelligence gathering became paramount. Officers staked out locations connected to the intruders, documenting movements and contacts. Undercover operations were considered, but the risk to both investigators and vulnerable civilians was immense. Each decision had to balance the need for evidence with the urgent requirement to protect potential victims. Every breakthrough came slowly, with painstaking attention to detail, as detectives navigated a labyrinth of threats, silence, and deception. The murder itself became a key piece of the puzzle. Ballistics and forensic analysis indicated the weapon had been handled by multiple individuals, suggesting coordination and premeditation. Investigators hypothesized that the act of murder was not only punitive but symbolic, intended to consolidate control over the Harris household and send a message to others in the network. The brutality of the crime highlighted the lengths to which these criminals would go to maintain dominance, and it added urgency to the effort to dismantle the operation before more lives were endangered. As leads multiplied, detectives discovered connections to other known offenders in the city. Past incidents of home invasions, drug trafficking, and intimidation were tied together, showing a network that spanned neighborhoods and preyed on vulnerable residents. Cuckooing was no longer an abstract concept or distant threat. It was a dangerous, organized criminal enterprise, capable of escalating from coercion to murder with frightening speed. The investigation demanded more than traditional detective work. Psychologists were consulted to understand the mindset of both victims and perpetrators, while social services provided insight into the vulnerabilities being exploited. Every angle of the case was scrutinized, from behavioral patterns to financial trails, creating a multi-layered strategy to dismantle the network. The murder of the Harris father became the catalyst for exposing a criminal operation that had long thrived in secrecy, forcing authorities to confront a dark reality hidden behind ordinary doors. Justice in the shadows, the takedown, and revelations. Months of painstaking investigation began to bear fruit. The detectives, now deeply familiar with the insidious patterns of the cuckooing network, were ready to act. Every detail uncovered from the Harris household, every fragment of witness testimony, and every financial transaction traced through local networks helped authorities map the operations with unprecedented clarity. The challenge was immense. These criminals were not only cunning but ruthless, fully aware of law enforcement methods, and prepared to evade capture. The first breakthrough came from surveillance footage captured near one of the intruders' known locations. Investigators identified several key figures involved in coordinating the network. These individuals were not random criminals, but part of a structured organization with specific roles. Some enforced control over homes, others managed drug distribution, and some handled the financial side of the operation. Understanding this hierarchy was crucial. It revealed that the Harris family's murder was both targeted and strategic, intended to cement authority over the victim's home and deter resistance from others under their influence. Coordinating with specialized police units, the operation to dismantle the network began under strict secrecy. Simultaneous raids were planned across multiple addresses, ensuring that no suspects could escape. The atmosphere was tense. Officers knew that any mistake could not only jeopardize the case but endanger lives. Behind the scenes, detectives meticulously cross-referenced every detail, from phone records to bank transactions, ensuring that each action had evidentiary support. The operation was precise, calculated, and relentless. When the raids commenced, the scale of the criminal network became shockingly apparent. Stashes of drugs, weapons, and cash were discovered in homes previously believed to be safe. In some residences, the evidence of cuckooing was undeniable: personal belongings of multiple victims, stored alongside drug paraphernalia, signs of forced entry, and messages meant to intimidate. The physical proof matched the psychological horror described by survivors, confirming the pervasive and dangerous reach of this criminal enterprise. Several key suspects were arrested immediately. Interrogations revealed chilling details about the methods used to control victims. They described the manipulation, the fear tactics, and the physical threats employed to maintain dominance. Some operatives admitted that the murder of the Harris patriarch had been intended as a warning to other families, demonstrating the lethal consequences of defiance. The revelations shocked even the most seasoned detectives. It was not only a criminal network they had dismantled, it was a system built on terror and exploitation. During the trial, the extent of the cuckooing operation became public knowledge. Witnesses recounted the systematic abuse and manipulation, illustrating a pattern of psychological and physical control that affected dozens of households. Experts explained the mechanics of cuckooing, emphasizing its subtlety and the difficulty in detecting it before it escalates to violence. The court hearings revealed the human cost of the network's operations: broken families, victims living in constant fear, and lives permanently altered by a criminal enterprise that preyed on vulnerability. The sentences handed down were severe. The leaders of the network received life terms or extended sentences, reflecting the calculated nature of their crimes. Lesser operatives were given lengthy prison terms, acknowledging their roles in perpetuating a cycle of fear and exploitation. Beyond the legal outcomes, the trial served as a stark warning: cuckooing is not a victimless crime. It is a calculated, systematic method of control that can escalate into murder, leaving devastation in its wake. For the Harris family, the judicial outcome provided a measure of closure, though the trauma remained. The mother and son, while scarred by the experience, began rebuilding their lives with support from social services and community initiatives designed to protect vulnerable individuals from similar crimes. The story of their ordeal highlighted the urgent need for awareness and intervention in cases of cuckooing, transforming their personal tragedy into a catalyst for change. As investigators reflected on the case, they recognized a critical lesson: vigilance and awareness are essential. Crimes like cuckooing thrive in silence and fear, but they can be dismantled through careful investigation, coordination, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The Harris family's story, horrific as it was, illuminated the hidden dangers in ordinary neighborhoods and the devastating consequences when those dangers are ignored. The legacy of the Harris case. The trial concluded, the criminals were convicted, and the Harris family could finally breathe a measure of relief. Yet, relief was tempered by grief and trauma. The murder of the father had left an indelible scar on the mother and son, shaping their lives in ways that could never be undone. Their home, once a place of warmth and normalcy, became a symbol of vulnerability and survival. It is in the aftermath of such tragedy that the deeper lessons of the case began to emerge for both authorities and the community. One of the most profound impacts of the Harris case was the spotlight it placed on cuckooing, a practice previously overlooked or misunderstood. Law enforcement agencies began to take cuckooing more seriously, recognizing it as not merely a nuisance or minor criminal activity, but a structured form of exploitation with the potential for lethal outcomes. Policies were reviewed, and specialized units were trained to identify signs of cuckooing early, intervening before intimidation could escalate to violence. The Harris case became a reference point for understanding the warning signs: unexpected visitors, unexplained property damage, and the presence of vulnerable individuals living under duress. Social services, too, learned vital lessons. Victims of cuckooing often remain silent due to fear, addiction, or manipulation. Programs were developed to provide safe spaces, counseling, and emergency housing for those at risk. The Harris mother and son, while still living with the memory of their ordeal, participated in initiatives to educate others about the dangers of cuckooing. Their experience underscored the importance of community awareness, empowering neighbors, friends, and professionals to recognize subtle signs of coercion and act before tragedy occurs. The case also forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about criminal networks operating in plain sight. These networks exploit systemic vulnerabilities, poverty, addiction, and social isolation to maintain control. By exposing the inner workings of the Harris family's attackers, the investigation demonstrated that crimes like cuckooing are rarely random. They are carefully planned and executed, relying on fear, manipulation, and silence to succeed. Awareness of this pattern became a crucial tool in preventing similar crimes in other communities. For the Harris family, healing was a slow and painful process. The mother and son moved into a new home, one free from intrusion, yet the psychological impact of living under constant threat lingered. Therapy, counseling, and community support played an essential role in helping them regain a sense of security. Their journey emphasized that survival is not merely about escaping physical danger, but also reclaiming agency, rebuilding trust, and confronting the lingering shadows of trauma. Investigators involved in the case reflected on the broader implications. The Harris family's tragedy highlighted the gaps in detecting cuckooing and responding to early signs. It emphasized the necessity of collaboration between law enforcement, social services, and the community to dismantle networks before they escalate. The case became a blueprint for proactive intervention, showing that vigilance, awareness, and decisive action can prevent vulnerable individuals from becoming victims of exploitation. The story of the Harris family also served as a cautionary tale for the public. Ordinary households, even in seemingly safe neighborhoods, can become targets for criminal operations if warning signs are ignored. It is a reminder that safety depends not only on personal vigilance, but also on a collective commitment to noticing, reporting, and addressing suspicious activity. Cuckooing thrives in silence. Exposure and intervention are the most effective defenses. Ultimately, the Harris case was more than a crime story. It was a wake-up call. It revealed the deadly potential of exploitation hidden in everyday life and the devastating consequences when criminal networks operate unchecked.